When I walked into the sprawling, cedar-scented lobby of the Cascade Mountains Resort, I truly believed I was there for a rare family reunion. I thought the years of quiet distance, the subtle digs at my expense, and the constant, quiet exclusions were finally being put to rest. My sister, Cressida, had called me 2 days prior, her voice uncharacteristically warm and inviting, telling me that her husband's family wanted to host a special Sunday brunch to bring everyone together. I had spent the entire 2-hour drive up the winding mountain roads feeling a foolish, fragile sense of hope. I thought my family finally wanted me around just for being me. Instead, I walked into a meticulously planned ambush. The lobby was an architectural marvel of vaulted wooden ceilings and massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped peaks. A massive stone fireplace crackled in the background, casting a warm, flickering glow on the oversized leather sofas arranged in the center of the room. That was where I found them. My sister, Cressida, sat casually with her husband, Bastian, and his parents, Upton and Pearl. They were surrounded by empty crystal champagne flutes, half-eaten artisan pastry towers, and a small mountain of shopping bags from the resort's exclusive, high-end boutiques. They carried the unmistakable, relaxed posture of people who had just spent 3 days indulging in every single luxury available to them. They did not stand up to greet me when I approached. They did not even offer a welcoming smile. Cressida just let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, as if my arrival was a severe inconvenience to her perfectly curated morning. She reached over, picked up a thick, leather-bound presentation folder from the coffee table, and casually tossed it right at my chest. It hit my winter coat with a dull thud and fell to the stone floor. "Pay it," Cressida said, her voice sharp and irritated, echoing slightly in the quiet lounge area. "You are the wealthy one. We need to get on the road soon." Before I could even process the sheer disrespect of the gesture, her mother-in-law, Pearl, let out a dry, rattling laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across a driveway. Pearl took a slow, deliberate sip of her sparkling water, looking me up and down with eyes full of sheer, unadulterated contempt. "Oh, just let her do it, Cressida," Pearl smirked, adjusting the heavy diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Her only use is funding our lifestyle anyway. All she is good for is opening her wallet and keeping her mouth shut." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Her only use is funding our lifestyle. The pure cruelty of the statement, the blatant, shameless admission that I was nothing to them but a walking bank account, stripped away every single illusion I had ever held about my place in this family. The humiliation burned hot in my throat. A younger version of me would have cried. A weaker version of me would have picked up that folder, swiped my credit card just to avoid causing a public scene, and cried the entire drive back to Seattle. But standing there in that opulent lobby, surrounded by their mocking, expectant faces, something inside my chest turned to pure, solid ice. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I just stared at the leather folder on the floor, then looked back at my sister. How did it come to this? How did my own flesh and blood become so comfortable treating me like a disposable, meaningless asset? They thought I would just fold under the pressure of their judgment. They thought they had me backed into a corner, bound by the invisible chains of family obligation. But they were wrong. So incredibly wrong. I leaned down slowly, keeping my eyes locked on Cressida, picked up the leather folder, and opened it. The number printed at the very bottom of the itemized receipt stared back at me in bold black ink. $4,500. I scanned the charges. Room service for a luxury penthouse suite. Deep tissue spa treatments for 4 people. Vintage bottles of wine. Guided mountain horseback tours. Designer retail purchases charged directly to the room. All consumed, enjoyed, and signed for over the past 3 days, long before I had even driven up the mountain. They had invited me for a Sunday brunch, but the tab they fully expected me to cover was for an entire VIP weekend that I was never invited to be a part of. My pulse pounded in my ears, a steady, heavy drumbeat of realization. I looked at Cressida. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her expensive cashmere sweater draped effortlessly over her shoulders. She looked so expectant, so unbelievably entitled. She genuinely believed I would pay her husband's family's extravagant vacation bill just to keep the peace and buy their temporary approval. Well, Bastian muttered, checking his expensive silver watch and shifting impatiently on the leather sofa. We have a long drive back to the city, Maeve. Hurry it up and settle the tab. I closed the folder. The soft snap of the leather seemed to echo in the sudden, tense quiet of our little circle. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply turned on my heel, walked away from their sitting area, straight over to the grand mahogany front desk, and calmly signaled for the manager. Cressida's annoyed sigh was loud enough to carry across the room. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maeve. It is just money. You lead massive projects for an aerospace firm, for crying out loud. Stop embarrassing us in front of everybody. I ignored her completely. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored suit approached the desk, his gold name tag identifying him as Valen, the guest relations manager. How can I help you today, ma'am? There has been a severe mistake, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking deep inside my coat pockets. I was just handed this final bill by that party sitting over by the fireplace. I am not a guest at this resort. I did not authorize a single one of these charges, and I will certainly not be paying for them. Valen blinked, his polished, professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He took the folder from my hands, typed a few things on his keyboard, and frowned deeply at his monitor. Ma'am, Miss Cressida listed your name and your credit card on file as the automatic guarantor for this penthouse suite when she checked in on Thursday afternoon. The ice in my chest shattered into sharp, jagged shards of pure, blinding rage. She had not just ambushed me with a bill. She had actively committed fraud. She had used my personal financial information, likely stolen from an old family emergency contact document I had foolishly trusted my parents with, to secure their luxury weekend. I did not sign anything, I stated, my tone dropping to a dangerous, unwavering whisper. I have not been on this property until 5 minutes ago. If there is a signature on that file, it is forged. Valen's face drained of color. Behind me, I heard the sudden, sharp scraping of chair legs against the stone floor. Cressida was standing up, her confident, mocking smirk finally slipping from her face. Call your security team, I told Valen, turning my head just enough to make direct eye contact with my sister. And you might want to call the local police department as well. We have a verified case of identity theft. Cressida stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. Bastian swallowed hard, taking a step backward, and Pearl's arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a pale, breathless panic. But what Cressida did not know was that this $4,500 bill was not the end of her scheme. It was merely the opening act of a brutal war that would ultimately cost her everything. The drive down the mountain was a blur of towering green pines, winding gray roads, and the sound of my own harsh breathing. The local police had arrived at the resort within 15 minutes, and despite Cressida's frantic, hysterical tears and my mother, Marjorie, screaming at me over the phone to drop the charges and stop ruining the family name, I stood my ground. I signed a formal statement for the police confirming the forgery. The resort management, terrified of a massive credit card chargeback and a lawsuit, forced Bastian and Upton to empty their own checking accounts and max out their remaining credit lines to cover the damages, right there in the lobby, under the watchful, uncompromising eyes of 2 armed officers. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the passenger seat. Missed calls from my father, Gerald. Angry, threatening texts from Cressida. I turned the device on silent, flipped it face down, and kept my eyes locked on the road ahead. The silence inside my car was heavy, thick with the ghosts of my past. The incident at the resort had not just broken my patience, it had unlocked a deep vault of memories I had spent years trying to suppress and ignore. It was a museum of pain, curated entirely by my own family. I was always the invisible child. Growing up, our house was a dedicated shrine to Cressida. Every mediocre drawing she made was framed in expensive wood. Every minor, expected achievement was celebrated with a lavish dinner out. And me? I was the reliable one. The quiet one. The one who did not demand attention or throw tantrums, which in my parents' twisted logic meant I did not deserve any support or affection. I remembered the day I graduated college. It was a memory burned into my mind like a brand. I had worked 3 grueling part-time jobs, tutoring underclassmen in advanced physics, shelving heavy books at the university library until midnight, and pulling early morning weekend shifts at a greasy diner just to pay my tuition. My parents had told me they could not afford to help me with school. I graduated at the very top of my aerospace engineering class. I bought a cheap, $30 dress from a discount rack for the ceremony because it was all I could afford. When I walked across the stage to receive my honors degree, listening to the roaring applause of the crowd, I looked out into the sea of proud families in the massive auditorium. The 4 seats I had carefully reserved for my family were totally empty. When I finally took the bus back to our house in the suburbs, exhausted but incredibly proud of myself, I saw that the driveway was full of cars. Brightly colored balloons were tied to the mailbox. I walked through the front door, clutching my hard-earned diploma to my chest, genuinely thinking they had thrown me a surprise graduation party. Instead, I found a massive, expensive custom cake sitting on the dining table that read in bright pink icing, "Congratulations, Cressida, licensed driver." She had finally passed her driving test on her 4th attempt. My father stood in the center of the living room and proudly handed her a set of keys to a brand new sedan, bought with the exact savings they claimed they never had for my education. When my mother saw me standing quietly in the doorway, she just waved a hand dismissively, not even glancing at the diploma in my hands. "Oh, Maeve, you're finally home," she said, sounding annoyed. "Put your little certificate away and go to the kitchen to help serve the drinks. Your sister is very overwhelmed with all this attention today, and we need you to pitch in." That was the established dynamic. My monumental, back-breaking efforts were expected and ignored. Her bare minimum accomplishments were treated like literal miracles. The memories kept flashing like aggressive strobe lights in my mind as I navigated the winding mountain turns. I remembered being 25 years old, struck down by a severe lung infection that left me entirely bedridden. I lived alone in a tiny, drafty apartment, burning with a dangerous fever for 4 straight days. I called my mother, my voice weak and raspy, begging her to bring me some canned soup or basic medicine because I was too weak and dizzy to stand up. She sighed heavily into the receiver, the sound dripping with irritation. "Maeve, you are a grown woman. Stop acting so helpless and dramatic. Cressida has a minor sore throat right now, and I need to stay here to make her herbal tea and keep her comfortable. Be responsible for once and handle it yourself." I ended up calling a kind neighbor to drive me to the emergency room, terrified that I was going to stop breathing in my sleep. But I survived. I always survived. I built a formidable, highly respected career. I bought a beautiful home. I accumulated significant wealth through sheer, brutal discipline and endless sleepless nights. And the very moment I became financially successful, the narrative within my family shifted violently. Suddenly, I was no longer the strong, independent daughter who needed no one. I was the selfish, wealthy sister who owed a massive, unspoken debt to the family. My parents began treating my income as a communal family fund. If Bastian lost yet another job because of his laziness, my mother would call me, expecting me to blindly cover their rent. When I refused, the emotional guilt trips were relentless and suffocating. "She is your sister, Maeve. You have so much money, why are you being so greedy? Family helps family." Today was the absolute breaking point. The $4,500 resort bill was not a simple mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, deliberate test. Cressida was testing the waters, pushing the boundaries, seeing exactly how much of my identity and my assets she could seize without my permission. And if she was bold enough to forge my signature for a luxury weekend in front of her in-laws, what else was she doing in the dark? What other pieces of my life was she trying to claim as her own? I pulled into the long driveway of my home in Seattle just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured lawn. My house was a beautifully restored historic property, featuring dark oak floors and original stained glass windows. I had bought it with my own hard-earned savings, though my parents constantly loved to tell their friends it was a family investment that they had helped me secure. I locked the heavy wooden front door behind me, the deadbolt sliding into place with a satisfying, echoing thud. The silence of my living room usually brought me immense peace, a sanctuary away from the demanding world of aerospace engineering, but tonight, the silence felt heavy and suffocating. I walked straight past the modern kitchen, past the blinking red light of my answering machine that indicated a dozen new voicemails, and headed straight down the hall to my private home office. At the very bottom of my heavy metal filing cabinet, hidden securely beneath old architectural blueprints, structural schematics, and years of tax returns, was a heavy steel lockbox. It originally belonged to my late aunt, the only person in my family who had effectively raised me when my parents were too busy fawning over Cressida. But before she passed away 2 years ago, she had given this box to my mother, or at least, that is what my mother proudly claimed. In reality, a woman named Gwendolyn, a fierce, uncompromising corporate lawyer and my aunt's closest lifelong friend, had handed it to me in secret on the rainy afternoon of the funeral. "Do not open this until you feel a cold wind inside your own home, Maeve," Gwendolyn had said back then, her eyes dark, serious, and filled with a strange kind of sorrow. "When you realize your sister is no longer just annoying, but genuinely dangerous. When they try to take what is yours, that is when you open it." For 2 long years, I had left the box entirely untouched. I had desperately wanted to believe Gwendolyn was just being dramatic. I had wanted to hold on to the fragile hope that despite their deep flaws and blatant favoritism, my family would never cross a serious criminal line against me. Today, they crossed it, burned the bridge, and danced on the ashes. I retrieved the small, intricate silver key from its clever hiding place taped behind a picture frame on my desk. My hands shook slightly as I inserted the key into the lockbox and turned it. The heavy latch clicked open. Inside the box lay a thick, organized stack of legal documents, heavily redacted bank statements, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Gwendolyn's sharp, elegant handwriting. I picked up the envelope first. My breathing slowed as I broke the red wax seal and unfolded the thick, cream-colored parchment paper. "My dearest Maeve," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means Cressida has finally made a move. You were always far too forgiving, always hoping for a supportive family that simply does not exist. Your parents are blinded by their own mistakes, and they will enable your sister's greed until there is absolutely nothing left of you. I saw this coming years ago, and so did your aunt." Attached to this letter are the foundational documents for a blind, protective trust. Before your aunt died, she saw exactly how Cressida looked at your success. She saw the simmering envy and the unbridled greed. Together, we structured a legal and financial fortress around you. The trust currently holds an emergency operational fund, several highly secure investments, and a protective legal lien on your historic home. The total protected value is $1,200,000. I gasped loudly in the quiet room, the air catching sharply in my throat. $1,200,000. My aunt had secretly transferred her own hidden wealth into a trust designed solely to protect me from my immediate family. She knew. She had always known. I forced my eyes to keep reading, scanning the page rapidly as my heart raced. This trust is legally untouchable by any family member. However, I have noticed concerning behaviors from Cressida recently. She has been asking strange, probing questions about your mental health. She has been planting seeds of doubt among your relatives. Maeve, listen to me carefully. If Cressida ever comes to you with any paperwork regarding shared property, medical proxies, or legal oversight, the war has already begun. Do not sign anything. Play dumb, record everything you can, and call me immediately." I dropped the letter onto the polished wood of my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. She has been asking strange questions about your mental health. Suddenly, small, weird interactions over the past 6 months started making terrifying, crystal-clear sense. Cressida asking me repeatedly if I was sleeping well, telling our relatives at Thanksgiving that I seemed paranoid and forgetful because of my high-stress corporate job. My mother casually suggesting over the phone that I needed to take a leave of absence and let someone else manage my finances for a while. The forged signature at the mountain resort was not just about stealing a luxury vacation. It was a calculated stress test. They were building a narrative of instability. I stared at the thick stack of legal documents resting inside the box. A fortress, Gwendolyn had called it. I was going to need every single brick, every single wall of it. I reached for my phone, scrolling past 19 angry missed calls from my mother and 5 from Cressida, and dialed Gwendolyn's private direct number. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert despite the late hour. Maeve. I saw the police report filed from the Cascade Resort in the system. I opened the box, I whispered, my voice rough and tight with emotion. I know, Gwendolyn replied, her tone cool, steady, and incredibly reassuring. Get some sleep tonight, Maeve. Lock your doors. The real fight starts tomorrow. What exactly was Cressida planning to do next? I was about to find out much sooner than I ever anticipated. I woke up the next morning to the distinct sound of metal scraping against metal. It was a subtle, grating noise coming from the front entryway of the house. I sat bolt upright in bed, the heavy dread and adrenaline from yesterday crashing back over me in an instant. I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 7:30 in the morning. The sun had barely begun to illuminate the gray Seattle sky. I slipped out of bed, grabbed a thick woolen robe, and crept quietly down the hardwood hallway. As I neared the living room, I heard the distinct, heavy click of my front door unlocking. Someone was using an old spare key, a key I had given my parents years ago for emergencies, and had long forgotten about. The heavy oak door swung open, and Cressida stepped inside, bringing a gust of chilly, damp morning air with her. She was dressed impeccably, as always, wearing a tailored beige trench coat, perfectly applied makeup, and holding a sleek, oversized designer handbag. She looked entirely too calm for someone who had nearly been arrested for identity theft and fraud less than 24 hours ago. "What are you doing inside my house?" I demanded, stepping out of the shadows and into the light of the entryway. Cressida flinched visibly, clearly not expecting me to be awake and waiting, but she recovered her composure instantly. Her face arranged itself into a mask of deep, sorrowful concern. It was a performance so rehearsed, so sickeningly fake, it made my skin crawl. "Maeve," she sighed heavily, gently closing the heavy door behind her. "I came to check on you. Yesterday was a lot. Mom and Dad are worried sick about you. I am worried sick about you." I crossed my arms tightly over my chest, planting my feet firmly on the floor. "You forged my signature to steal a $4,500 vacation, Cressida. You are not worried about me. You are worried about the police investigation." "Oh, please," she waved a manicured hand dismissively, walking right past me and into the living room as if she owned the property. She began pacing the room, her eyes darting critically over my antique furniture and lingering on the expensive, original oil paintings our father had given me years ago. That was just a silly misunderstanding at the resort. The hotel staff got confused with the booking. But your reaction, Maeve? Calling the armed police on your own family over a little money? That is what has everyone so deeply concerned about your state of mind. I felt a cold prickle of warning at the back of my neck. Gwendolyn's letter flashed brightly in my mind. Play dumb, record everything you can. I slowly slipped my right hand into the deep pocket of my robe, my fingers finding the smooth edge of my smartphone. Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I pressed the side volume button 3 times, a hidden shortcut I had set up years ago to instantly start a voice recording without waking the screen. My reaction was perfectly normal for someone whose identity was stolen by their own sister, I said slowly, testing the waters, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. Cressida shook her head slowly, looking at me with faux pity that made my stomach turn. "It really wasn't normal, sweetie. You have been acting so erratic lately. Forgetting important things. Snapping at people for no reason. That high-pressure aerospace engineering job is clearly breaking your mind. You are living in this huge, old house all by yourself, getting paranoid and isolated." She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a crisp, white legal document folder. She set it down on my glass coffee table, right on top of a stack of architectural magazines, patting it smoothly. That is exactly why I am here today, she continued, her voice dripping with artificial, saccharine sweetness. Mom, Dad, and I had a very long talk last night after the awful incident. We think you need help managing your life right now. Just temporarily, of course, until you get your severe stress under control. I stared down at the white folder. What is that? It is a shared property responsibility agreement, Cressida said casually, as if she were offering me a cup of morning coffee. It just legally adds my name to the deed of this house and gives me partial administrative oversight of your primary bank accounts. It means if you forget to pay a bill, or if you have another episode, like you did yesterday, I can step in and handle things for you without the bank freezing everything. It takes all the pressure off you, Maeve. I looked from the legal document to her face. The sheer audacity was staggering. It took my breath away. She wanted me to voluntarily sign away half my assets under the guise of mental health support. She wanted the historic house. She wanted the accounts. She wanted control. You want to co-own my house, I stated flatly. I want to protect you. Cressida snapped, a sudden flash of genuine, ugly anger breaking through her sweet facade. Look at this place, Maeve. It is too big for you to maintain. It is full of old junk. We could sell these ugly paintings, modernize the kitchen, maybe even put the entire property on the market and get you into a nice, quiet, managed apartment facility. You need supervision, and you know it. I stepped closer to the table, looking down at the paper. There was a bold dotted line waiting for my signature at the bottom. And if I refused to sign this agreement? Cressida's posture stiffened. The sweet, caring sister act vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless glare. She leaned in, her voice dropping an octave into something venomous. Mom, Dad, and everyone in our extended family already see how unstable you are, Maeve. The neighbors hear things. People at your company can probably tell you are slipping mentally. If you do not let me help you voluntarily today, you leave us no choice. We will have to step in and do it the hard way. For your own good. It was a threat. A direct, undeniable legal threat. She was going to try and have me declared mentally incompetent by the state. I took a deep, shaky breath, fighting the urge to scream, and kept my expression perfectly blank. I am not signing anything today, Cressida. I need time to think about it. She smirked, clearly mistaking my practiced calmness for submission and fear. Take 24 hours. But do not push me, Maeve. You will lose. She turned sharply and walked out, the heavy front door clicking shut behind her. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and stopped the recording. I had her. The exact moment Cressida's luxury SUV disappeared down the street, my phone began to vibrate violently on the kitchen counter. It did not stop for the rest of the day. The coordinated psychological attack had officially begun. First, it was my mother. I answered the call, knowing I needed to document every single interaction. Maeve, Marjorie barked into the receiver, not even bothering with a basic greeting. Cressida just called me in tears from her car. She said you were hostile, aggressive, and confused when she tried to bring you some simple paperwork to help you out. What is wrong with you? I am fine, Mom. I am just not signing over the deed to my house, I replied evenly, staring blankly at the wall. You are not fine, she shrieked, her voice echoing in my quiet kitchen. You called the armed police on your own brother-in-law yesterday. You are hallucinating enemies everywhere. Your father and I are terrified for your safety. If you do not sign that agreement with your sister right now, we are going to have to take drastic, legal measures to ensure you do not destroy your own life. I hung up without saying another word. A minute later, a text message pinged from my father. Stop being incredibly selfish. Your sister is trying to save you from your own mental breakdown. Do the right thing before we have to force you into care. Then came the extended family, the classic, flying monkeys, entirely mobilized by Cressida's perfectly crafted victim narrative. My older cousin sent a long, rambling paragraph about how I needed to seek immediate psychiatric help and that pushing family away was a sign of trauma. An aunt left a sobbing voicemail saying she was praying for my fragile state of mind and begging me to let Cressida take over. They were overwhelming me on purpose, trying to create a massive paper trail of concern, establishing a family-wide consensus that I was rapidly losing my grip on reality. I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen as the notifications piled up. The psychological pressure was immense and suffocating. It felt like the walls of my own home were physically closing in on me. They were actively constructing a cage made of lies, and they were using my own family as the iron bars. Around 2 in the afternoon, the old landline rang. It was a rotary phone I kept in the hallway, mostly for emergencies and local utility calls. I picked it up slowly. "Hello, Maeve? It is Mrs. Higgins from down the street." Mrs. Higgins was a sweet, 80-year-old widow who regularly baked cookies for the neighborhood block parties and kept an eye on everyone's gardens. "Hi, Mrs. Higgins. Is everything okay over there?" "Well, dear, I was actually calling to ask you that," she said, her voice hushed, trembling, and full of genuine anxiety. "Your sister came by my porch this morning after she left your house. She was crying so hard. She told me you have been suffering from severe depression, that you are not eating, and that you have been talking about, well, harming yourself. She asked me to keep a close eye on your house in case you do something drastic." My blood ran cold. The air in my lungs froze solid. Harming myself. Cressida was not just spreading vicious rumors to the family. She was poisoning my neighborhood. She was intentionally creating independent witnesses. If Mrs. Higgins genuinely believed I was suicidal and Cressida called the authorities for a sudden welfare check, the police would arrive already primed to see an unstable, dangerous woman. Any anger or frustration I showed would just be used as proof of my supposed insanity. This was no longer just about greed or a stolen vacation. This was legal assassination. I thanked Mrs. Higgins profusely, assured her in my calmest, most cheerful voice that I was perfectly fine and that my sister was just dealing with some intense personal drama that was making her act out, and hung up the phone. I gripped the edge of the wooden table until my knuckles turned stark white. They wanted a guardianship. They wanted the state court to declare me entirely incapacitated so Cressida could become my legal guardian, seize my bank accounts, sell my historic home to bail out her husband's failing family, and lock me away in some managed care facility where I could never, ever fight back. I grabbed my car keys, my phone, and the heavy locked box my aunt had left me. I was done waiting for the next blow. Gwendolyn's prestigious law office was located in a sleek, glass-fronted skyscraper in downtown Seattle. She was waiting for me in her expansive corner office, gazing out at the gray, rain-slicked city skyline. When I walked in, my clothes slightly damp from the rain, and dropped the heavy steel box onto her polished mahogany desk, she turned around, her expression completely unreadable. "She brought the paperwork this morning," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury, refusing to sit down. "A shared property responsibility agreement." She threatened me directly. My parents threatened me over the phone. And she is telling my elderly neighbors I am suicidal. Gwendolyn did not gasp. She did not look shocked or surprised. She merely walked over to her desk, sat down in her leather chair, and folded her hands neatly. "Play the recording, Maeve." I pulled out my phone, navigated to the audio file, and pressed play. Cressida's arrogant, threatening voice filled the quiet, soundproofed office. "If you do not let me help you voluntarily, you leave us no choice. We will have to step in and do it the hard way." When the recording ended, a slow, predatory smile spread across Gwendolyn's face. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Beautiful. She is incredibly arrogant, and arrogance breeds stupidity. She is trying to get a guardianship over me, isn't she? I asked, finally sinking into one of the plush leather chairs opposite her desk, my adrenaline starting to crash. "Worse," Gwendolyn said, pulling a thick manila file from her desk drawer and sliding it smoothly across the desk toward me. "She has already started the legal process." I opened the file with trembling hands. Inside was a copy of a formal inquiry submitted to the county court. "My paralegal flagged this in the system yesterday afternoon," Gwendolyn explained, her tone purely professional and analytical now. Cressida submitted a preliminary background check request for a guardianship petition a full week ago. The resort incident? The $4,500 bill? That was just a calculated stress test. She wanted to provoke you into a massive public meltdown so she could add a police report to her file proving you are erratic and hostile. When you remained calm and reported the fraud instead, she panicked and moved to step 2, the home invasion and the blatant coercion. I stared at the court document. My own sister's name was listed as the petitioner. My name was listed clearly under the section labeled incapacitated adult. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, it almost felt entirely disconnected from reality. So, what do we do? I asked, looking up at Gwendolyn, feeling a desperate need for a battle plan. Do we file for a restraining order right now? Do I go to the police for harassment? No, Gwendolyn said sharply, shaking her head. If you do that now, it becomes a simple family dispute in the eyes of the law. A he said, she said scenario. She will play the crying, concerned sister in front of a judge, and the court might just order mediation. We do not want mediation, Maeve. We want total annihilation. She leaned forward, tapping a manicured fingernail against the steel box on her desk. We are going to activate the defensive state of your aunt's trust immediately. As of this moment, every single asset you own is legally locked down and untouchable. If Cressida somehow manages to forge a deed transfer, it will trigger an automatic federal fraud alert. But we are not going to tell her that. I frowned, trying to follow her complex legal strategy. You want me to just play along with them? I want you to play dead, Gwendolyn corrected, her eyes gleaming. I want you to go home, ignore all their calls, and let them think their isolation tactic is actually working. Cressida is desperate. She needs money, and she needs it fast. If she thinks you are breaking under the pressure, she will overplay her hand. She will file the actual, formal guardianship petition and submit falsified evidence to the court. And the very moment she lies to a judge under oath, she commits a felony. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The trap was being set. Not a trap to merely stop her from harassing me, but a trap to let her walk willingly into her own destruction. They will probably send the police to your house for a welfare check soon to build their case, Gwendolyn warned. You must be perfectly calm, perfectly rational. Offer the officers coffee. Show them your spotless house. Give them my business card and say nothing else. I can do that, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Good, Gwendolyn leaned back, folding her arms. Let the games begin. When the rain in Seattle has a specific way of falling when the temperature drops. It does not just rain, it bites. The wind howled against the original stained glass windows of my historic home, rattling the wooden frames like a warning. It was nearing midnight, 2 days after my fateful meeting in Gwendolyn's downtown office. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by printed emails, old bank statements, and sticky notes, trying to map out every single interaction I had with my family over the last 3 years. I needed to see the web Cressida had woven. Then, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight through my chest. Nobody visits at midnight in a rainstorm unless it is an emergency, or unless it is a threat. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Had Cressida come back? Had she brought our parents this time to physically force their way inside? I crept silently toward the front hallway, keeping the lights off. I peered through the small, distorted glass peephole. Standing on my covered porch, soaked to the bone and shivering in a thin jacket, was not Cressida. It was our older brother, Dashiell. I had not spoken to Dashiell in 4 months. He had always been the quietest member of our family, the one who kept his head down, avoided conflict at all costs, and simply nodded along with whatever narrative our parents spun. He was married, had 2 young kids, and mostly stayed out of the family crossfire. Seeing him standing there, looking terrified and desperate, made my heart ache. I quickly unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Dashiell? What are you doing here? You are freezing. He did not step inside right away. He just stood on the welcome mat, water dripping from his dark hair, looking at me with eyes full of a profound, agonizing guilt. Maeve, he whispered, his voice cracking over the sound of the rain. I could not sleep. I have not slept in 3 days. I know what they are doing to you. And I cannot let them do it. I pulled him inside by the sleeve of his wet jacket, locked the door behind us, and led him straight to the kitchen. I handed him a thick towel and poured him a glass of water. He sat at my kitchen island, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the glass. "What do you know, Dash?" I asked quietly, taking a seat across from him. He reached into his soaked jacket pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He set it on the marble countertop between us. It looked incredibly small, but the way he stared at it, it might as well have been a live explosive. "They think I am stupid," Dashiell began, taking a shaky breath. "Mom, Dad, Cressida. They think because I hate arguing, I just ignore everything. Last week, I was over at Mom and Dad's house helping them fix their internet router. Cressida was there with Bastian. They were drinking wine in the dining room, talking loudly. They did not care that I was in the next room. They talked about you, Maeve. They talked about taking your house." My stomach plummeted. Hearing it confirmed by a third party made the nightmare undeniable. I stayed quiet, Dashiell continued, wiping his face with the towel. But I listened. And then I started digging. I know Bastian's cousin, the one who works at the local bank. I asked him a few discreet questions. "Maeve, Bastian's parents, Upton and Pearl? Their real estate company is gone. Bankrupt. They're hiding it from their country club friends, but their massive mansion is in pre-foreclosure. They're literally weeks away from being thrown out onto the street. They owe hundreds of thousands of dollars to private creditors." The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. The resort bill. The rush to get my name on a shared property deed. It was never about my mental health. It was a desperate, frantic cash grab to save the Hargrove family from total financial ruin. My historic house, fully paid off and located in a prime Seattle neighborhood, was their golden ticket. "They need your assets to secure a new massive loan," Dashiell said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Cressida told Mom that if they get the guardianship approved by a judge, she can legally liquidate your property to pay for your care facility and use the remaining funds to bail out Upton and Pearl. But it gets worse." He pointed a trembling finger at the silver USB drive. "I snuck into Cressida's home office 2 days ago when she was hosting a dinner party. I guessed her laptop password. It was her own name, of course. I copied everything I could find into this drive. I grabbed my own laptop from the living room, brought it to the kitchen, and plugged the drive in. A folder popped up on the screen. It contained dozens of files. Audio recordings. Scanned PDFs. "Open the folder labeled medical," Dashiell instructed, refusing to look at the screen. I clicked it. Inside were 3 scanned documents from a local psychiatric clinic. They were evaluation forms detailing severe paranoid delusions and aggressive tendencies. And at the bottom of each page was my signature. She forged them, I breathed, my blood running entirely cold. She practiced my signature from old birthday cards and forged medical documents. "She is planning to submit those to the county court next week," Dashiell said. "She has a lawyer who specializes in aggressive elder care takeovers. They are building a paper trail that makes you look like a danger to yourself and others. Maeve, I am so sorry. I should have stood up to them years ago. I should have protected you. I let them treat you like garbage because I was too scared of Mom's yelling." Tears pricked my eyes. Not tears of fear, but tears of overwhelming relief. For my entire life, I thought I was entirely alone in this family. I thought no one saw my pain. But my brother saw it. And he had chosen me over them. "You're protecting me right now, Dash," I said, reaching across the island and squeezing his cold hand. "This drive changes everything. This is the exact weapon we needed." Dashiell looked up, his jaw setting with a newfound resolve. "Whatever you are going to do to them, Maeve, do not hold back. Burn their entire scheme to the ground. I will testify in court. I will stand on the witness stand and tell the judge exactly what they are." The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the front windows of my house exactly 3 days later. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 7 o'clock. I had been sitting on my sofa, drinking a cup of herbal tea, waiting. Gwendolyn had warned me that the next logical step in Cressida's malicious playbook would be law enforcement involvement. To secure a guardianship over an independent adult, the petitioner needs undeniable proof of instability. What better proof than a police report documenting a frantic, uncooperative woman resisting a wellness check? I calmly set my teacup down on the coaster. I smoothed the wrinkles from my simple, elegant beige sweater, took a deep, centering breath, and walked toward the front door. Two loud, authoritative knocks echoed through the hallway. I opened the door. Standing on my porch were two uniformed officers from the King County Sheriff's Department. The one in front, a tall man with graying hair whose name tag read Deputy Ronan, had his hand resting cautiously near his utility belt. They looked incredibly tense, bracing themselves for a chaotic scene. "Good evening, officers," I said, offering a polite, relaxed smile. My voice was even, pitched perfectly to convey casual curiosity. "How can I help you tonight?" Deputy Ronan blinked, clearly surprised by my calm demeanor. He glanced at the notepad in his hand, then back at me. "Are you Maeve? The homeowner?" "Yes, I am," I replied, stepping back slightly to show I was not a threat. "Ma'am, we received a highly concerning phone call about an hour ago," Ronan explained, his tone careful. "A family member contacted dispatch claiming you were experiencing a severe mental health crisis. They reported that you were barricaded inside the house, throwing things and making threats to harm yourself. We're here to conduct a standard welfare check to ensure you are safe." Barricaded. Throwing things. Harming myself. Cressida had really gone all out with the theatrics on the 911 call. She wanted me to look like a lunatic. "I understand," I said softly, projecting nothing but cooperation. "That sounds incredibly frightening. Please, come inside out of the cold. You are welcome to look around." I opened the door wider, inviting them into my brightly lit, impeccably clean living room. The scent of lavender from an essential oil diffuser filled the air. Classical piano music played softly from a smart speaker in the corner. There was no mess. There were no barricades. It was the exact opposite of a crisis zone. The two deputies stepped inside, their defensive postures instantly relaxing as they took in the serene environment. They looked at each other, silent communication passing between them. "As you can see, officers, I am perfectly fine," I said, walking over to my dining table and picking up a neat, labeled manila folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. "I was actually just reviewing some engineering schematics for my job before you arrived." Deputy Ronan let out a small sigh, removing his hat. "Ma'am, do you have any idea why a relative would make such a frantic call? Your sister sounded genuinely hysterical on the phone." "I do know why, unfortunately," I replied, handing the manila folder to Ronan. "My sister, Cressida, and her husband's family are currently facing severe financial bankruptcy. Last week, she attempted to forge my signature to pay for a $4,500 luxury vacation, which I reported to the local authorities. Since then, she has been retaliating by attempting to build a fraudulent legal case to have me declared incompetent so she can seize this property." The younger officer's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. Ronan opened the folder. Inside, I continued calmly, "You will find a copy of the police report from the Cascade Mountain Resort documenting her identity theft. You will also find a certified letter from my primary care physician, dated yesterday, declaring me in perfect physical and psychological health. And finally, you will find the business card of my corporate attorney, Gwendolyn. She requested that if any further harassment occurs via emergency services, you contact her directly." Deputy Ronan reviewed the documents, his expression shifting from caution to grim understanding. He had been a cop long enough to recognize a malicious false report when he saw one. He handed the folder back to me with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the intrusion, Maeve," Ronan said, his tone shifting to one of professional sympathy. "It is a terrible thing when family uses emergency resources as a weapon. We will document that we found you in a safe, stable environment, and I will be making a specific note in the system regarding the fraudulent nature of the caller's claims. If she keeps calling us, she is going to face charges for misuse of the 911 system." "Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate your time and your service," I said, walking them back to the door. As the cruiser pulled out of my driveway without flashing lights or sirens, I locked the door and leaned against it. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shaky exhale. Cressida had fired her biggest weapon to establish her narrative, and it had bounced right off my armor. The police report would not show a hysterical woman. It would show a calculated, malicious sister. The trap was fully set. Now it was time to spring it. Cressida's patience ran out on a Saturday afternoon. She believed her psychological warfare was working. She assumed the welfare check had shaken me, the family pressure had isolated me, and my silence over the past few days was proof that my spirit was finally broken. She thought I was a wounded animal, ready to surrender my territory. She did not know I was the hunter waiting in the blind. At 2 o'clock sharp, 3 luxury vehicles pulled into my long gravel driveway. My mother and father stepped out of the first car. Upton and Pearl, the bankrupt in-laws desperate for a lifeline, emerged from the second. Cressida and Bastian stepped out of the third. They moved like a conquering army, confident, arrogant, and ready to claim their spoils. I stood in my living room, watching them through the sheer curtains. I was not alone. Sitting quietly in the high-backed armchair in the corner of the room, partially obscured by the shadows, was my lawyer, Gwendolyn. She wore a sharp, charcoal-gray suit, her briefcase resting on the floor beside her. She looked like an executioner waiting for the signal. The doorbell did not ring. They did not bother with pleasantries. The heavy brass doorknob turned, and my family marched right into my house using the old spare key again. "Maeve," my mother, Marjorie, called out, her voice echoing in the hallway. "We are here. It is time to stop this nonsense and get things in order." They filed into the living room, their eyes scanning my home not with love, but with greedy appraisal. Upton actually tapped his knuckles against an antique wooden credenza, evaluating its resale value. Pearl looked at my expensive oil paintings and smirked. "We are going to have to call an estate liquidator for all this clutter," Pearl whispered loudly to Bastian. Cressida stepped to the front of the group, holding a thick stack of legal documents. She wore a victorious, condescending smile. "Maeve, sweetie, I am glad you're home. The police told me they stopped by the other night. You must have been so scared. But do not worry, we are taking over now. I have the formal guardianship consent forms right here. You sign them today, in front of all of us as witnesses, and we can avoid the embarrassment of a public court hearing." I stood by the fireplace, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I looked at the 6 people standing in my living room, the people who were supposed to be my family. "And if I do not sign?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. My father, Gerald, crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. "Then we go to a judge on Monday morning, Maeve. We have statements from relatives. We have medical records proving you are delusional. You have 0 chance of winning. Stop being difficult and hand over the property management to your sister." "Medical records?" I echoed, tilting my head slightly. "You mean the psychiatric evaluations Cressida forged on her laptop?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Cressida's triumphant smile froze, then slowly melted off her face. Her eyes darted left and right, panic briefly flashing in her pupils. "I have no idea what crazy nonsense you are talking about. You are proving my point, Maeve. You are hallucinating." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and connected it to the smart speaker sitting on the mantel via Bluetooth. "You see, Cressida," I said smoothly, "you made a fatal miscalculation. You thought everyone in this family was either as greedy as you, or too terrified of Mom to speak up. But you forgot about Dashiell." At the mention of our brother's name, my mother gasped. I pressed play on the audio file Dashiell had extracted from her computer. The crisp, clear sound of Cressida's voice filled the room, amplified by the high-quality speaker. "The forgery is perfect," Cressida's voice echoed off the walls. "I copied her signature from the birthday card she sent Mom last year. The court will never question a document from this clinic. Once the incompetency filing is approved, we liquidate the property immediately. Bastian, you tell your parents the bank will have their money by the end of the month." Maeve is too isolated and depressed to contest anything. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and undeniably glorious. The color drained from Cressida's face so fast she looked like a ghost. She staggered backward, bumping into Bastion, who looked like he was about to physically vomit. Pearl and Upton stood frozen in sheer terror, realizing their criminal conspiracy was just played out loud. That is illegal, my father stammered, his voice trembling, his tough guy facade crumbling into dust. You cannot record people secretly. Actually, Gerald, in this state, single-party consent applies to electronic data retrieved from shared family networks, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the room. Gwendolyn stood up from the shadowed armchair, stepping into the light. She picked up her briefcase and set it on the coffee table. The click of the metal latches sounded like a judge's gavel. Hello, Marjorie. Gerald, Gwendolyn said, offering a smile that contained zero warmth. It has been 2 years since the funeral. You look exactly as miserable as I expected. My mother put a hand to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Gwendolyn, what are you doing here? I am here acting as the primary legal counsel for my client, Maeve, and as the executor of the blind trust established by your late sister, Gwendolyn replied, pulling out a massive stack of files. A trust that holds exclusive, unbreakable legal rights to this property and every asset Maeve owns. A trust that you, Cressida, just attempted to defraud. Cressida opened her mouth to speak, but only a desperate, high-pitched squeak came out. Here is what is going to happen, Gwendolyn announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Every piece of evidence we possess, the forged medical documents, the audio recordings, the financial records proving the Hargrove family's impending bankruptcy, and the fraudulent police welfare report, has already been compiled. We are going to court on Monday. But we are not going for a guardianship hearing. We are going to demand a permanent dismissal with prejudice, followed immediately by a referral to the district attorney for criminal fraud and elder exploitation. Bastion's knees literally gave out. He collapsed onto my sofa, burying his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. Upton grabbed Pearl's arm, pulling her toward the door. We need a lawyer, Upton wheezed, his chest heaving. We need a criminal defense lawyer right now. Cressida stood frozen in the center of the room, her entire world collapsing in real time. She looked at our parents for support, but my mother and father were backing away from her, realizing the catastrophic legal danger they had just walked into. Get out of my house, I said, my voice echoing with total, absolute finality. And do not ever come back. The county courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, lemon floor wax, and polished mahogany. It was the scent of consequences. I sat perfectly straight at the petitioner's defense table, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome sense of total invincibility. Gwendolyn sat beside me, arranging her perfectly organized binders of evidence. Across the aisle, the scene was entirely different. Cressida sat at the plaintiff's table, looking 10 years older than she had 3 days ago. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, and her hands shook violently as she gripped a pen. She had managed to hire a cheap defense attorney at the last minute, a sweaty man who kept frantically whispering in her ear. Our parents, Marjorie and Gerald, sat in the gallery behind her, looking utterly defeated. The Hargroves, Bastion, Upton, and Pearl were nowhere to be seen. They had cowered out, terrified of being implicated in a public courtroom. The heavy wooden doors behind the bench opened, and Judge Holbrook entered. She was a woman in her late 60s, with iron gray hair pulled into a tight bun and sharp, piercing eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Gwendolyn had told me earlier that Judge Holbrook was famously intolerant of manipulative guardianship filings. All rise, the bailiff announced. We stood, then sat as the judge took her seat and opened the massive file in front of her. We are here today regarding a petition for protective guardianship over the adult individual, Maeve, filed by the petitioner, Cressida, Judge Holbrook stated, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. She looked over her glasses at Cressida's lawyer. Counsel, I have reviewed the preliminary filings. You are alleging severe cognitive decline and danger to self. Proceed with your evidence. The sweaty lawyer stood up, clearing his throat nervously. Yes, Your Honor. We have statements from family members detailing erratic behavior, and we originally intended to submit medical evaluations. Intended to? Judge Holbrook interrupted, raising a sharp eyebrow. Where are they? We are withdrawing the medical documents from evidence at this time, Your Honor, the lawyer mumbled, his face turning bright red. He knew they were forged, and submitting them to a judge would cost him his law license. Judge Holbrook's eyes narrowed dangerously. You are alleging a woman needs her basic human rights stripped away, and you are withdrawing your primary medical evidence on the day of the hearing? What exactly are you bringing to my courtroom, counselor? Before the man could formulate a pathetic excuse, Gwendolyn stood up smoothly. Your Honor, if I may. We object to this entire proceeding, and we ask the court to review Exhibit A, B, and C in the defense binder provided to the bench. The judge opened the binder. Exhibit A, Gwendolyn stated loudly, ensuring every word carried to the gallery where my parents sat, is a certified financial report proving that the petitioner's extended family, the Hargroves, are facing imminent bankruptcy and foreclosure on a multi-million-dollar debt. They have a direct, urgent financial motive to seize my client's unencumbered real estate assets. Cressida flinched as if she had been struck with a whip. Exhibit B, Gwendolyn continued, her voice rising with righteous authority, contains digital forensic evidence, including recovered audio files and metadata, proving that the petitioner, Cressida, intentionally forged psychiatric evaluations with the explicit intent to defraud this court. She planned to use this court as a weapon to steal a historic home to pay off her in-laws' debts. The judge's face turned into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She slammed her hand flat against the wooden bench. Is this true, counselor? She demanded, glaring at Cressida's lawyer. The man physically took a step away from Cressida. Your Honor, I was not made aware of the origins of those documents until this morning. I advised my client to drop the petition immediately. It is a lie. Marjorie suddenly screamed from the gallery, standing up in a desperate panic. My daughter Cressida is a good person. Maeve is the one lying. Maeve is sick. Judge Holbrook pointed a sharp finger directly at my mother. Bailiff, remove that woman from my courtroom right now. One more outburst, and she spends the night in a holding cell for contempt. 2 armed bailiffs immediately moved toward my parents. Gerald grabbed Marjorie's arm, his face pale with humiliation, and practically dragged her out the double doors. The silence left in their wake was deafening. Finally, Your Honor, Gwendolyn said softly, turning toward the gallery. We call our only witness to the stand. Dashiell. The heavy doors opened again, and my brother walked in. He looked nervous, but his posture was straight. He walked past Cressida, refusing to make eye contact with her, and took his seat in the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Please state your relationship to the petitioner and the defense, Gwendolyn asked. I am their brother, Dashiell said clearly into the microphone. Did the petitioner, Cressida, ever discuss her plans regarding Maeve's property with you or in your presence? Yes, Dashiell said, his voice steadying. She bragged about it. She said Maeve was too isolated to fight back. She said forging the medical documents was easy. She said once the court gave her control, they would sell the house, pay off Upton and Pearl's massive debts, and put Maeve in a state-run facility to keep her quiet. A collective gasp echoed from the few law clerks and observers in the room. Cressida buried her face in her arms on the table, sobbing hysterically. The illusion of the golden, perfect daughter was completely, publicly annihilated. Judge Holbrook did not need to hear another word. She took off her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and let out a breath of pure disgust. In my 20 years on the bench, the judge began, her voice dripping with venom, I have seen greedy families. I have seen manipulative relatives. But the sheer, calculated malice of this petition is staggering. It is an insult to the justice system and a profound danger to vulnerable adults everywhere. She picked up her wooden gavel. This petition is dismissed with prejudice. It can never be refiled. Furthermore, I am ordering the court clerk to immediately forward Exhibit B to the district attorney's office with my personal recommendation to pursue felony charges for forgery, perjury, and attempted fraud against the petitioner. We are adjourned. The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The war was over, and I had won. 3 weeks later, the entire landscape of my family had shifted so drastically it felt like living in a different universe. The consequences of the failed guardianship ambush were swift and utterly devastating for the opposing side. Without the influx of cash they were banking on stealing from my estate, Upton and Pearl Hargrove defaulted on their massive loans. The bank moved in aggressively. Their sprawling, luxurious country club mansion was foreclosed upon. The moving trucks arrived on a rainy Tuesday, hauling away their expensive designer furniture to be auctioned off. Upton and Pearl were forced to move into a tiny, 2-bedroom rental apartment in a less desirable suburb, their social status completely obliterated. Cressida's life unraveled just as spectacularly. The district attorney took Judge Holbrook's recommendations seriously. An official criminal investigation was opened into the forged medical documents. Terrified of facing actual prison time, Bastian completely turned on his wife. He packed his bags, moved out of their shared home, and formally filed for divorce. A few days later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It was a handwritten letter from Bastian. Maeve, it read, "I am a coward. I stood by and watched my family try to destroy you because I was too weak to stop them. I am cooperating fully with the district attorney. I gave them access to Cressida's old emails and the timeline of my parents' bankruptcy. I am not asking for your forgiveness, because I do not deserve it. I just want you to know the truth is out." With her husband gone, her in-laws ruined, and massive legal bills piling up from her criminal defense lawyer, Cressida lost her own house. The golden child, the sister who had looked down on me my entire life, was forced to pack her designer clothes into garbage bags and move into the damp, unfinished basement of our parents' house. I did not feel sorry for her. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. When you try to bury someone alive, you cannot complain when you end up falling into the grave you dug yourself. I blocked my parents' phone numbers. I blocked their emails. When my mother tried to send a flying monkey ant to my house to plead for family forgiveness and ask for financial help for Cressida's legal fees, I simply handed the ant a copy of the forged medical documents and closed the front door in her face. The harassment stopped immediately after that. My home, once a silent fortress waiting for an attack, slowly transformed back into a sanctuary. On a bright, crisp Saturday morning, I was standing on my front porch, holding a mug of hot coffee, watching the autumn leaves fall across the lawn. A familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Dashiell stepped out, wearing old jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying a heavy toolbox. "Hey," he called out, offering a genuine, relaxed smile. "You said the hinges on that antique back door were sticking. I figured I could take a look at it." I smiled back, a real, warm smile that reached my eyes. "I would appreciate that, Dash. I have fresh coffee in the kitchen." We spent the entire afternoon working together on the house. We sanded down old wood, tightened screws, and laughed about a terrible movie we used to watch as kids. It was the first time in my entire life I felt like I truly had a sibling. We did not talk about Cressida. We did not talk about our parents. We simply existed in the present, building a new, healthy relationship on the ashes of the toxic one. "You know," Dashiell said later, leaning against the kitchen counter with a beer in his hand, "Mom called me yesterday. She was crying, complaining that the house is too crowded with Cressida living in the basement, and asking why you are being so cruel by ignoring them." I paused, wiping down the marble counter. "What did you say?" Dashiell took a sip of his beer and shrugged. "I told her she was lucky you only ignored them instead of suing them for emotional distress." Then I hung up. I laughed, a bright, clear sound that felt incredibly healing. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had fundamentally broken and reformed. I was no longer the invisible, reliable ATM. I was the architect of my own life, heavily guarded, deeply respected, and utterly free. Winter arrived in the Pacific Northwest, blanketing the Cascade Mountains in a thick layer of pristine white snow. I stood by the large bay window in Gwendolyn's downtown office, looking out at the city below. The sky was a brilliant, icy blue. "The paperwork is finalized, Maeve," Gwendolyn said from behind her desk. I turned around. Resting on the polished mahogany was a sleek, professional binder with a newly printed logo on the cover. The Ant Shield Foundation. After the trial, I realized something profound. I had survived because I had resources. I had a brilliant, aggressive lawyer. I had a secret trust fund built by a loving aunt. I had an engineering salary that allowed me to fight back. But thousands of vulnerable adults did not have those weapons. Every single day, toxic family members use the guardianship system to strip independent people of their rights, their money, and their dignity. I decided to use a portion of my wealth to fight back on a larger scale. I founded a nonprofit organization dedicated entirely to providing emergency legal counsel and financial auditing services to individuals facing predatory, non-consensual guardianship petitions from malicious family members. Gwendolyn eagerly joined the board of directors as our lead legal strategist. Dashiell volunteered to run our community outreach program, helping victims gather digital evidence to defend themselves. "We already have 3 active cases assigned to our pro bono attorneys," Gwendolyn noted, tapping the binder. "A niece trying to steal her wealthy, perfectly sane uncle's farm. A son trying to lock his mother in a home to access her pension. We are going to ruin their plans, Maeve." "Good," I said, a deep sense of purpose filling my chest. "Let them learn the hard way." I walked out of the office building that afternoon and stood on the bustling Seattle sidewalk. The cold air felt refreshing. My life was no longer defined by the trauma inflicted by my parents or the malicious greed of my sister. It was defined by the strength it took to defeat them and the purpose I found in the aftermath. Sometimes, blood is not thicker than water. Sometimes, blood is a poison you have to actively extract from your veins if you want to survive. I excised the poison. I lost a mother, a father, and a sister, but I gained a brother, a mentor, and most importantly, I finally gained myself. Looking back at that horrific weekend at the mountain resort, I do not regret freezing them out for a single second. I do not regret letting Cressida walk blindly into a felony charge. But tell me, everyone watching, was I wrong for pushing the court to hand over the digital evidence to the prosecutor, knowing it would completely ruin my sister's life and bankrupt her in-laws? Did I go too far in my retaliation, or did they get exactly the karma they ordered? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be the jury. Thank you for following this emotional journey until the very end. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Your support helps the channel continue to grow and bring you more compelling stories of seeking justice. See you in the next story.